Hi everyone, welcome back. This is SEC Fanatic and I am your host, Matthew Johnson. Thank you for watching on YouTube or listening on Stitcher or iTunes. I really appreciate it. It really does mean a lot. I would like to say that I am very happy that, if you've been watching for a while, you know that I've been doing a segment called Preseason Preliminary, which basically I'm just previewing every SEC team before the season hits. And for the past couple of weeks, I've had interviews and then I've had teams that I need to preview, and I've kind of just been like, well, I don't want to double hit them with a preview and an interview in the same segment, so I broke it up. And so the podcast for a couple weeks here on iTunes and Stitcher has purely just been for the interviews that I've been able to be doing, and they've been some great ones. If you haven't seen them, go back and look. They've been pretty cool. I've had the Auburn University PA announcer, Rick Smith, and he was a great guy to talk to. Outside of the SEC, I got to talk to Ball State radio play-by-play announcer for pretty much every sport, and he also did the CrossFit Games. His name's Joel Godet. He has his own podcast called Play by Playcast. Go check that out, because that's pretty cool too. I got to talk to him, which was pretty awesome. I've also, even going further back, I've had MMA fighter Isaac Stackhouse, who also has his own podcast. So just a lot of, and there's plenty of more who just aren't on the top of my head right now. But go check those out, past episodes. If they have a podcast, go check out their podcast. But again, thank you for coming on and listening to SEC Fanatic. But yes, back to what I was originally saying, is that preseason preliminary is now back. It's not just a video anymore. I had originally been just releasing the football previews on YouTube. For this week, though, for the Georgia preview, you are also just going to be able to listen to it with just your 2 ears. And so that to me is really exciting as far as this week's goes. This week's entire podcast, this whole week, is going to be previewing Georgia football. Now, next week we're going to get to interview a man by the name of Danny Perry. He was a former Auburn fullback back in the early to mid 2000s. And then he's a doctor now. And so, of course, more information, more detail, that'll come up next week, and also a preview of Auburn next week. And college football is coming so close. It's really, really exciting for me at least, and hopefully for you. So let's talk Georgia football in this week's edition of Preseason Preliminary by SEC Fanatic. Last year in 2017, Georgia went 13-2, 7-1 in the SEC. Their only losses were to Auburn and to Alabama. They did beat Auburn again, though. They got revenge for that loss and took the SEC championship. This is the first time an Eastern team has won the SEC championship since Florida in 2008. As far as 2018 thoughts, Jake Fromm returns. He had a little bit of a boating accident, I heard. I think he broke his hand, from what I understand, in a boating accident over the summer, but that doesn't seem to be a huge deal for Georgia fans. That'll probably just be a college kid being a college kid and hurting his hand and moving on with it. His backup seems to have caused some stir from what I'm seeing popping up in these news reports. Some people are like, ooh, this backup, he's pretty talented and he could challenge Jake Fromm. Kind of like Fromm did to Easton, and I don't see that playing out again unless Fromm gets hurt. But I think Fromm's Georgia's guy, and I don't really see anything to not say that Fromm's not Georgia's guy. They do have a great kicker returning, and he's only a junior. Blankenship is the name, and he is one of the better kickers in college football. They also have one of the better wide receivers returning in college football, in DeAndre Swift. They also have really solid running backs coming back. Of course, they lose Nick Chubb and Sony Michel, and those will, of course, be tough losses for Georgia to try to replace. I mean, when you talk about, as far as production goes, they did a lot for Georgia. One gets tired, the other comes in. But Georgia does have a stable of 5-star recruits coming back in. They had the number 1 recruiting class in 2018. It is going to be tough to replace Roquan Smith on the defense, though, and that great running back duo. I think it's going to be tough to replace both of those guys. So that is going to be interesting for this Georgia team. But I think that number one recruiting class goes to show how Georgia is kind of working their way up in the East and starting to attract athletes over there as being more of this powerhouse team, kind of like in Alabama. The reason Alabama has been so successful is because they can recruit so well. And I think Georgia, you're starting to see them step up there as well. Lots of great athletes come out of Georgia. A lot of the Alabama team's athletes also come from Georgia. For example, Cam Newton from Georgia. But anyway, Georgia's doing really, really well in recruiting, obviously. And I think that kind of shows that their program is starting to be here and starting to be here to stay. And so I think that is going to help provide with the depth and making up what has been missing from Smith and the running back duo of Chubb and Michelle. I would say that Georgia has a pretty easy path back to the SEC championship. I don't think there's as much talent in the East after we've previewed. Georgia's our last team previewing in the SEC East. And so I previewed every team in the East and everyone in the West but Auburn. And just taking a look at talent returning, Georgia's by far got the most. I think Florida, in my opinion, Florida or South Carolina challenges as the top talent returning aside from Georgia. But whereas in the West, I think you have Mississippi State, Texas A&M, Auburn, maybe LSU, who are all those powerhouses. I think they all have talent. I think they all have the talent really to contend with Alabama. Some of you may not agree with that, but I do think all of those teams I just said from the West would have the ability to contend with Alabama and make them at least scared, whereas I think really only Florida and South Carolina have the ability to scare Georgia at all. But you never know. That's the great thing about college football is you never really do know what all is going to happen. Speaking of thinking about what's going to happen, let's talk about season predictions. For Georgia, the season predictions come from SG1 Sports, great YouTube channel. Go check them out. And their prediction is for them to go 11-1 with wins over Austin Peay, South Carolina, Middle Tennessee, Missouri, Tennessee, Vanderbilt. They're playing a lot of teams from Tennessee. LSU, Florida, Kentucky, UMass, and Georgia Tech, and with a loss to Auburn. Georgia has the second weakest strength of schedule behind Alabama. Alabama has the weakest schedule in the SEC, and Georgia has the second weakest as ranked by SG1 Sports. They are an unbiased college football YouTube channel. So Georgia should be embarrassed like Alabama if they don't make it to the SEC championship. If Alabama and Georgia are not the two SEC teams in the SEC championship, then those two programs should be embarrassed. They've got pretty easy paths there as far as strength of schedule goes for those two. And as much as I hate to say it, being an Auburn fan, this is a podcast about all of the SEC where I have to stay unbiased. So, good luck to Georgia. But I think that's going to be all for today. Thank you guys again for watching or listening, however you are. If you don't mind, leave a review or a like, comment, share. That just really appreciates. I really appreciate that a lot, and I really just thank you guys for, again, taking the time out of your day to see what this random fan has to say.